With their own customers boycotting them in a fully organic grassroots movement, the situation was already bad for Anheiser-Busch. But overnight, it just became much, much worse, and in ways that few have adequately communicated. On May 19th, the New York Post reported that Anheuser-Busch loses LGBTQ+ rating for missing key moment to stand up for their influencer of choice. If your instant reaction to that headline is "so?", then I don't blame you, because it doesn't look that bad compared to the countless other headlines to come out in the past few weeks. But it is, because what that headline actually says is ESG rating downgraded. Anheuser-Busch now at risk of insolvency. Of all the things that have happened to Bud Light and Anheuser-Busch so far, an argument can be made that this is the worst, and we're about to find out why. In this editorial, I will explain why the whole reason that Anheuser-Busch sponsored Mulvaney in the first place was in order to preserve their ESG rating, even if that put them at odds with their customers. And why it was all for naught, as their ESG rating just created anyway, and finally, what that means. Ever notice how huge corporations like Disney and their brands Marvel and Star Wars seem extra susceptible of going woke? Well, that is no coincidence. In our previous Bud Light video, we broke down how the ESG racket works, and you can click the banner up in the corner or the link in the description to see the full explanation. But to get everyone up to speed for the big news of today, let's do a very brief summary. Big companies have big expenses, as their product is costly to produce, and their staff who make, sell, and run the entire organization involved in getting that product to you all have to be paid. And here's the kicker, the bill for that is due long before the product is sold to you, the end consumer, and the company earns the revenue needed to pay those bills. In other words, even for huge corporations, or in fact even more so for huge corporations, there is a hole, a gap in the calendar between when their bills are due and when the earnings needed to pay those bills come in, and if they cannot plug that hole, they are technically insolvent. The traditional way of plugging that hole is with a credit line, issued either by the bank or some other financial institution. Through such credit lines, the company can stay in business and grow up to a healthy medium-sized point where they are sustainable and have sufficient cash reserves that they can plug that hole themselves using their own means, so they don't need credit lines anymore. But if that company then gets ambitious and wants to become a huge corporation to grow beyond what they can sustain on their own, then they need those credit lines again to prop up growth in the form of additional expansions that otherwise would be unsustainable. And that is how huge corporations are made. They live and die by their credit lines. What has happened in the last few years is that without the companies who rely on credit lines ever asking for it, the bodies issuing the credit lines and other loans have nonetheless linked them to the company's ESG score. ESG is the latest invention from the world of banking and finance, and the ESG score indicates how well the company complies with the demands under the different categories under the wider ESG umbrella. For instance, under S for social, you find diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is further divided into other categories like LGBTQIA+, where rainbows and other public virtue signaling is required. The company has no real choice but to comply, because since the credit line is linked to their ESG score, they run the risk of losing their credit line if they don't. That may sound unfair. Companies that always took their credit lines for granted never signed up for suddenly having to adopt this ESG stuff, but that's okay. The financial institutions pushing for this know this is new and difficult stuff, which experienced and competent marketers and managers cannot be expected to suddenly become experts on. That's why they recommend these companies hire HR and marketing personnel from the right universities and with the right ESG indoctrination. I mean ESG training, as they will know which policies to adopt and which further personnel to hire in order to ensure the ESG score is retained, even if these people who know how to evolve the company are otherwise incompetent in what is supposed to be their field of expertise.
And I would say the most important thing about this job is that you have to prioritize bringing other people along the way. Community and women, I mean, it doesn't mean anything unless I am positively impacting other people. And so that's been just incredibly important to me. My decisions with teams, I mean, I try to build teams of people who maybe nobody else has taken a chance on them. I try to bet on people who haven't had the opportunity, bet on people with similar values as me, who are hungry and want to do great things, but care about each other and protect each other and are kind and good. And I try to bring that, honestly. Female representation in this role has been something I've been really committed to. And what I brought to that was a belief in, okay, what does evolve and elevate mean? It means inclusivity. It means shifting the tone. It means having a campaign that's truly inclusive and feels lighter and brighter and different and appeals to women and to men.
This month I celebrated my day 365 of womanhood, and Bud Light sent me possibly the best gift ever, a can with my face on it. Love ya! Cheers! Go team! Whatever team you love, I love too. Okay.
What you just saw was an example of an ESG-driven advertisement. Other recent examples of this comes from Miller Lite that wants to shred history, from Starbucks where Indian dads go to accept that their sons go trans, and from Dove. And yes, I will get back to those in separate videos. Please like this video, help share it, especially on Facebook, and then hit subscribe if you haven't done so already, so you don't miss out on my future breakdowns and analysis of those. But now that we've caught up with how Anheiser-Busch looking to retain the ESG score upon which their credit lines are dependent is what led to the Mulvaney sponsorship in the first place, let's see how it was all for naught. If Alyssa Heinerscheid had hired anyone at all that were actually competent within the field of marketing in her marketing department, then maybe things would have played out differently. Maybe they would have found some other way to promote Bud Light which would have retained the ESG score without causing the now ex-Bud Light drinkers to recoil. But that's what happens when the VP appears to be incompetent and hires nothing but rejects and other women that share her values and her worldview. She sparked a 100% organic, grassroots viral movement against not just Bud Light, but against Anheuser-Busch and parent company AB Inbev at large.
So it's truly saddening that with the woke Anheuser-Busch Bud Light situation, come to do a little research and find out that my favorite beer is under the Anheuser-Busch umbrella.
And one of the ones I drink besides Bud Light.
So, cheers.
See ya.
No more Anheuser-Busch products in this house.
Nope.
Want to play the woke game? It's fine. Not spending my money on it.
We've all seen the viral videos and they are amazing, but even the little viral support they may get, Anheuser-Busch would probably rather do without.
Alright everyone, so it's Friday night, I'm getting ready to go out, this is the look, I'm feeling cunt, but before I go out, I've got to pregame. And the only way I pregame is with an ice cold Bud Light. So good. Happy Friday.
All of this puts Anheuser-Busch between a rock and a hard place, or rather, between their customers and between the issuers of their ESG-linked credit lines. I kind of predicted what was going to happen in our previous video. Let's replay what I said there. Because of the customer backlash, a number of NGOs, ESG awarding bodies and other lobbyists expect Anheuser-Busch to stand by and support Mulvaney. But if they were to do that, then their remaining customers could flee, putting the whole company at risk in the medium to long term. Having an ESG-linked credit line won't save the company if there aren't enough customers to maintain their business. But those customers demand an apology and an all-out distancing from Mulvaney. But if Anheuser-Busch were to do that, their ESG score would go down the drain, taking their credit line with it. Having customers won't help the day when they need a credit line without having one. As such, Anheuser-Busch have chosen, or rather, due to lack of options, gone with something of a middle ground, pleading ignorance, which is bullshit, blaming a rogue agency for the advertisement, all while soft distancing themselves from it. This, if anything, made matters worse, as it didn't fool their own ex-customers to come back. But it did prompt visible members of the LGBTQIAP+ community to join in on the boycott, because how dare they not stand by Mulvaney? Now, returning to current events, and the article that introduced this video, this is exactly what has happened. Anheuser-Busch loses LGBTQ+ rating for missing key moment to stand up for Dylan Mulvaney. The May 19th article reads, "The nation's largest gay advocacy group stripped Anheuser-Busch of a key metric following the beer giant's backpedaling over Bud Light's controversial tie-up with trans influencer Dylan Mulvaney. The Human Rights Campaign, which issues a corporate equality index to rate companies on their policies toward workers in the LGBTQ community, told the Belgian-based brewer that it will slash its perfect 100 score, according to a letter leaked to USA Today on Thursday. Moving to USA Today and their May 18th article, Bud Light makers stripped of LGBTQ+ rating for caving to Dylan Mulvaney backlash, Eric Blom of the Human Rights Campaign is quoted as saying, "Anheuser-Busch had a key moment to really stand up and demonstrate the importance of their values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and their response really fell short." In other words, one of the ESG score awarding bodies just punished Anheuser-Busch for failing to stand by and support Mulvaney, even if doing so would have cost them what little remains of their customers. That's the irony here. Anheuser-Busch only went down this path in the first place in order to preserve their ESG score, but because they didn't go far enough in excluding and alienating their own customers, they lost that rating anyway. So, what does this mean? This downgrade alone doesn't mean that Anheuser-Busch will lose any and all credit lines overnight. They would have had to actively distance themselves from both Mulvaney and every other aspect of ESG for that to happen. But it does mean that Anheuser-Busch are now on notice and expected to do better. They will be told in no uncertain terms that they will have to get their ESG score back up, or else. But, of course, doing that while their customers are fleeing to the point that analysts downgraded Anheuser-Busch stock might prove a challenge. And now, this Human Rights Commission, as well as other ESG score awarding bodies, will be expecting them to pull out all the stops for Pride Month. So it will be interesting to see how they will manage this. We will, of course, keep you up to date as events unfold. But for now, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments.